Karen Blackwell's piercing shriek echoed across Maple Ridge Estates as she watched her prized Pomeranian Mr. Fluffington emerge from David Cooper's front yard covered head to paw in thick, dark mud. The dog, normally a pristine ball of golden fluff, resembled a dripping chocolate confection trailing sludge across the immaculate sidewalk of their gated community. "What have you done to my baby?" Karen screeched, her perfectly highlighted bob swinging wildly as she rushed toward her pet. Her Louis Vuitton handbag slipped from her shoulder, landing dangerously close to the muddy trail. Several neighbors peeked through their curtains, sensing the brewing storm better than any meteorologist could predict. David Cooper stood at his doorway, arms crossed, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. After 6 months of finding dog waste on his meticulously maintained Kentucky bluegrass and watching Mr. Fluffington dig holes in his flower beds, he finally taken action. "I simply watered my lawn, Karen," David replied calmly. "Very thoroughly." "You turned it into a swamp on purpose." Karen's face flushed crimson, clashing spectacularly with her coral blouse. "This is targeted harassment. The HOA will hear about this." As if summoned by the mention of their sacred acronym, Deborah Wilson, the HOA president, emerged from her colonial-style home across the street. At 67, with steel-gray hair and a posture that could shame a military surgeon, Deborah had ruled Maple Ridge with an iron fist for 15 years. "What seems to be the problem?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew and was merely following protocol. "David has deliberately sabotaged his front lawn to ruin my dog," Karen sputtered, attempting to wipe mud from Mr. Fluffington's fur with designer tissues from her purse. "Look at this disaster. My poor baby could have contracted some disease." Deborah turned her gaze to David's yard. Indeed, what had once been an emerald rectangle of perfect grass now resembled a Louisiana bayou after a particularly enthusiastic rainstorm. "Mr. Cooper," Deborah began, her voice dripping with rehearsed disappointment, "Maple Ridge Estates Covenant Section 7, Paragraph 3 clearly states that all front lawns must be well-maintained and aesthetically consistent with community standards. This situation violates our guidelines." David nodded politely. "I'm aware of the guidelines, Deborah. I'm simply dealing with a persistent trespassing issue. Section at Paragraph 12 states that pet owners must maintain control of their animals at all times and clean up after them. Karen's dog has been using my yard as a personal bathroom for months." Karen gasped, clutching her muddy dog tighter to her chest, oblivious to the stains forming on her blouse. "Mr. Fluffington would never. He's a show-quality purebred with impeccable manners." David silently pulled out his phone and showed a screen full of timestamped security camera footage. Mr. Fluffington, in gloriously clear resolution, defecating in various parts of David's yard on multiple occasions, while Karen stood on the sidewalk, purposefully looking at her phone. Deborah's thin lips pressed into an even thinner line. "Karen, we need to talk." The following morning, Karen sat rigidly in the Maple Ridge Estates Community Center, a structure that resembled a miniature White House and served as the HOA's seat of power. Across from her, the 5-member HOA board sat in matching high-backed chairs, with Deborah Wilson presiding at the center. The walnut table between them held a single folder. Blackwell, K. Violations. "Mrs. Blackwell," Deborah began, adjusting her reading glasses. "In the past year, you accumulated 17 complaints regarding Mr. Fluffington's bathroom habits, 9 noise complaints about your 6 a.m. vocal coaching sessions, and 4 violations of the holiday decoration time limit restriction." Karen shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Those complaints are frivolous, and I've already explained that Mr. Fluffington has a sensitive stomach." Board member Herbert Jenkins, a retired accountant with a perpetual frown, cleared his throat. "Your dog's digestive system doesn't explain why you fail to clean up after him." "I always carried bags," Karen responded defensively, patting her purse as if it contained evidence of her good citizenship. "Yet our security cameras show otherwise," Deborah noted, sliding several printed images across the table. "These were taken over the past 3 months." Karen stared at the photos, her cheeks burning. There she was in her designer walking outfits, deliberately looking away each time Mr. Fluffington did his business on someone's lawn. One particularly damning photo showed her actively hurrying away from a fresh deposit on the miller's prize-winning hydrangea bed. "This is an invasion of privacy," Karen whispered, though her indignation lacked its usual fire. "Community security cameras in public areas are outlined in your homeowner agreement, paragraph 43, which you signed," Deborah reminded her. "But more concerning is your behavior after yesterday's incident." The door opened and David Cooper entered, holding a tablet. He nodded politely to the board members and took a seat at the far end of the room. "Mr. Cooper has provided additional evidence we find troubling," Deborah continued. She gestured to David, who tapped his tablet screen. The room's projector illuminated, showing Karen returning to David's house at 11:43 p.m. the previous night. The night vision footage clearly showed her emptying a large bag of dog waste onto David's porch, then ringing his doorbell before scurrying away like a teenager after a prank. "I was returning what belongs to him," Karen exclaimed, sitting straighter. "He ruined my dog's coat. Do you know how much it cost to have Mr. Fluffington professionally groomed? $800. Herbert Jenkins' eyebrows shot up to his receding hairline. $800 to wash a dog. He requires a special organic oatmeal shampoo and fur conditioning treatment," Karen explained as if discussing essential medical care. "His fur has lost its luster because of David's mud trap." Deborah sighed, the sound of someone who had moderated too many petty disputes. "Mrs. Blackwell, the board is issuing you a formal warning. You will receive a $250 fine for the waste disposal violation and a $100 fine for each documented instance of failing to clean up after your pet." Karen's mouth fell open. "That's nearly $2,000. You'll also need to formally apologize to Mr. Cooper," Deborah added, "and ensure Mr. Fluffington stays off his property." Karen's eyes narrowed as she glanced at David. "And what about his swamp?" "That's definitely against regulations." Deborah nodded. "Mr. Cooper has agreed to restore his lawn contingent upon your compliance with pet regulations." As the meeting concluded, Karen clutched her designer purse so tightly her knuckles whitened. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 3 days after the HOA hearing, Karen sat at her glass dining table, surrounded by printed HOA bylaws, neighborhood maps, and a legal pad filled with notes. Mr. Fluffington lounged on a velvet cushion nearby, freshly groomed and sporting a new rhinestone collar. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 10 times, but Karen barely noticed, too absorbed in her planning. "Section 8.24, she murmured, highlighting a passage. "Property modifications visible from the street or common areas must maintain aesthetic harmony with surrounding properties." She smiled thinly. "David's precious lawn is just the beginning." Karen had reluctantly paid her fines and delivered a terse 3-sentence apology to David Cooper, but public humiliation demanded a proportional response. As the ex-wife of a moderately successful corporate attorney, Karen considered herself something of a legal strategist. If she couldn't beat the HOA outright, she would use their own rules as weapons. Her doorbell rang, interrupting her scheming. Karen opened the door to find Marjorie Peterson and Trish Williams, fellow members of her Wine Wednesday group, both wearing matching tennis outfits despite neither having played tennis in decades. "We heard what happened," Marjorie exclaimed, bustling past Karen into the marble-floored foyer. "The whole neighborhood is talking about it." "Deborah has gone too far this time," Trish added, following behind. "Fining you for that little dog? Mr. Fluffington is practically a neighborhood mascot." Karen ushered them into her living room, pleased to have allies. "It's not just about the fines. It's the principle. David Cooper deliberately targeted my dog with that mud pit." "What are you planning to do?" Marjorie asked, settling onto Karen's white suede sofa. "You always have a plan." Karen smiled, the expression not quite reaching her eyes. "I'm going to run for HOA president." The women gasped in perfect synchrony. "Against Deborah?" Trish whispered, as if the name might summon her. "She's been president since the Obama administration." "Exactly," Karen nodded. "It's time for change. Maple Ridge needs leadership that understands the modern homeowner's needs." She passed them each a mock-up of a campaign flyer she created. "Karen Blackwell, a fresh vision for Maple Ridge." "You've already made flyers?" Marjorie asked, impressed. "And I've identified 17 HOA regulations that are outdated or unnecessarily restrictive," Karen continued. "Did you know we're technically not allowed to have bird feeders or garden gnomes? My mother left me her antique gnome collection," Trish exclaimed, suddenly invested. Karen nodded sympathetically. "Deborah's regime has gone unchallenged for too long. I've already spoken with the Hendersons and the Paddles. They are on board." What Karen didn't mention was the real first phase of her plan, Operation Cooper Consequences, which would begin tonight. After her friends left, Karen drove to Home Depot in the neighboring town, where she wouldn't be recognized. She purchased supplies with cash: industrial-strength fertilizer, wildflower seeds, nominally HOA's approved lists, and a timer-controlled sprinkler system. That night, dressed in black and wearing a wide-brimmed hat to obscure her face from security cameras, she crept toward the community's central green space, directly across from David Cooper's house. Over the next 3 hours, Karen carefully planted the wildflower seeds in a pattern that would only become apparent once they grew, a massive arrow pointing directly at David's house. The fertilizer would ensure rapid growth, and the timer-controlled sprinklers, disguised as regular irrigation, would keep them flourishing despite the upcoming dry season. By Election Day in 6 weeks, the arrow of unauthorized wildflowers would be in full bloom, a public testament to David's hypocrisy about lawn maintenance and a rallying symbol for Karen's campaign. Let's see how the board handles this, Karen whispered to herself as she returned home, already planning her next move in what would become known throughout Maple Ridge as the Garden Wars. The community bulletin board outside Maple Ridge's clubhouse had become a battlefield. On Monday morning, Karen's campaign posters, glossy, professional, and featuring her best professional headshot, covered nearly every inch of available space. By Monday afternoon, they'd been partially covered by official HOA notices reminding residents that campaign materials must be limited to one 8.5x11 poster per community board. By Tuesday, Karen had replaced them with exactly one poster per board, each one newly designed and measuring precisely 8.5x11 inches. Next to each, she'd also placed separate informational flyers about neighborhood beautification initiatives, which just happened to include her campaign logo. She's exploiting loopholes, Deborah fumed during an emergency board meeting. The regulations clearly state. The regulations state one campaign poster. Herbert Jenkins interrupted, uncharacteristically animated. Her beautification flyers technically don't qualify as campaign materials since they don't explicitly ask for votes. Whose side are you on, Herbert? Deborah asked sharply. Herbert straightened his bow tie. I'm on the side of proper procedural adherence as always. What no one at the table realized was that Herbert had recently received approval for his Japanese maple installation, a project Deborah had blocked for 3 years, after a private meeting with Karen about botanical diversity initiatives. Karen was methodically building alliances throughout the neighborhood, one special interest at a time. Meanwhile, David Cooper had problems of his own. Despite repairing his lawn to pristine condition, he'd received 4 separate HOA violation notices in 2 weeks. One for a garbage can left visible from the street, though he hadn't been home that day. Another for excessive vehicle presence, when his brother visited with his family. A third for a wind chime that allegedly exceeded the permitted decibel level. And finally, one for unapproved holiday lighting, though the only lights on his property were standard security lights. Each complaint was anonymously submitted through the HOA's online portal, each requiring David to submit formal responses and attend mini-hearings. Though none resulted in fines, the bureaucratic harassment was taking its toll. On Wednesday morning, David was startled by loud drilling outside his house. He opened his front door to find workers installing a new street lamp directly in front of his bedroom window. Excuse me, he called to the workers. Was there notification about this installation? Got the work order right here. The foreman responded, handing over a clipboard. Emergency safety measure requested by the safety committee. David scanned the form, his eyes catching on the authorization signature. Karen Blackwell, Acting Chair, Neighborhood Safety Initiative. There is no Neighborhood Safety Initiative, David said. The foreman shrugged. The paperwork's approved, sir. We're just doing our job. David immediately called Deborah, who arrived 15 minutes later, visibly annoyed. She's created a fake committee, David explained, showing Deborah the work order. Deborah pinched the bridge of her nose. According to bylaws, any resident can form a special interest committee with 3 supporting signatures. Apparently, she's found 3 people to back this safety initiative. So she can just install streetlights wherever she wants? Not exactly, but by the time we untangle the authorization process, the lamp will be installed. I'm sorry, David. That evening, as David tried to sleep with a new industrial-strength LED streetlight blazing through his blinds, he received a text from an unknown number. A photo of Karen and Mr. Fluffington seated beneath an umbrella at the community pool, both wearing sunglasses. The message read only, "Sleeping well?" Across the neighborhood, Karen's wildflower arrow had begun to sprout in the community green space, though its pattern wasn't yet discernible. She'd also begun Phase 3, daily walks with Mr. Fluffington past David's house, the dog now trained to sit and stare at David's property without setting paw on it, malicious compliance at its finest. The neighborhood was taking sides, and lawn care had become political. The battle for Maple Ridge had only just begun. On a humid Saturday morning, Karen stood in her kitchen, staring in disbelief at the photo her friend Trish had just sent her. Someone had erected a 6-foot wooden fence around David Cooper's entire property overnight, a clear violation of at least 4 separate HOA regulations regarding fence height, material, and permit procedures. More shocking than the fence itself was the small sign affixed to it, authorized by Deborah Wilson, HOA president. That hypocrite, Karen whispered, zooming in on the image. For weeks, she'd been carefully operating within the tangled web of HOA regulations, exploiting loopholes while technically following rules. Now Deborah had abandoned pretense entirely. Karen's phone rang. Herbert Jenkins calling. Have you seen it? He asked without preamble. I'm looking at a picture now, Karen replied. Is it legal? Herbert's indignation vibrated through the phone. Absolutely not. There was no committee review, no public comment period, no architectural submission. She's claiming presidential emergency authority under some obscure bylaw from 1997. The one meant for natural disasters? Precisely. She's classifying your campaign as a community emergency. Karen felt a strange mixture of outrage and pride. Becoming a community emergency meant she was winning. We need to talk, Herbert continued, lowering his voice. Not just you and me. Several board members are concerned about Deborah's methods. Could you host a discreet meeting? By noon, Karen's sunroom had transformed into an insurgent war room. Present were Herbert Jenkins and 2 other board members, along with representatives from the Garden Club, the Community Watch Program, and the Maple Ridge Recreational Committee, all groups that had clashed with Deborah's iron-fisted leadership over the years. She's calling an emergency vote to change the election procedures, explained Linda Martinson, the board secretary. She wants to require 5 years of prior Iowa committee experience to qualify for the presidency, which would disqualify me, Karen noted. And almost everyone else, Herbert added. It's a transparent attempt to maintain power. Karen paced the sunroom, Mr. Fluffington following at her heels. This had evolved beyond petty revenge. Deborah was threatening the democratic process itself. In her myopic focus on David Cooper, Karen had stumbled into a larger political awakening. We need to unite, Karen declared. Not just against Deborah, but for a better Maple Ridge. She outlined a new strategy. Each representative would rally their respective groups behind a community-first platform, emphasizing transparency, reasonable rule enforcement, and increased resident input. The wildflower arrow in the community green space, now becoming visible as plants sprouted, would be rebranded as an eco-friendly native species demonstration garden. David Cooper's fence gives us the perfect example of leadership hypocrisy, Karen explained. We'll document every instance where rules were selectively enforced. As the meeting concluded, Karen felt a strange sensation, something beyond the vengeful satisfaction that had driven her actions so far. She was genuinely connecting with neighbors, finding common cause in their shared frustration. For someone who had primarily viewed the community as a backdrop for her personal status, this shift toward authentic community engagement felt unfamiliar but not unwelcome. That evening, walking Mr. Fluffington past David's newly fenced property, Karen stopped abruptly when David emerged from his front door. Their eyes met across the barrier Deborah had erected between them. After a charged moment, Karen spoke first. That fence is hideous. David nodded slowly. I didn't ask for it. I know, Karen replied. Deborah's overreaching. Another pause, heavy with the weight of their weeks-long feud. Your dog looks well, David finally offered. Karen glanced down at Mr. Fluffington, who was, for once, sitting calmly on the sidewalk instead of straining toward David's lawn. He's been properly trained now, Karen admitted. I should have done it sooner. It wasn't quite an apology, but in the charged context of Maple Ridge politics, it qualified as a diplomatic breakthrough. Would you like to hear what Deborah said when I objected to the fence? David asked, a conspiratorial note in his voice. Karen raised an eyebrow. I would, actually. And just like that, the most unlikely alliance in Maple Ridge Estates was formed. The community center buzzed with tension as residents filed in for the emergency AHOA meeting Deborah had called. Extra chairs had been brought in to accommodate the unprecedented turnout. Nearly 80% of homeowners were present, a stark contrast to the usual dozen regulars who typically attended. Karen sat in the front row, flanked by Herbert Jenkins and, surprisingly, David Cooper. Mr. Fluffington rested in a luxuried pet carrier at her feet, wearing what appeared to be a tiny campaign button on his rhinestone collar. Deborah Wilson tapped her gavel sharply at 7:00 p.m. precisely. This emergency session will come to order, she announced, her voice carrying the practiced authority of 15 years at the helm. We face an unprecedented challenge to the stability and standards of Maple Ridge Estates. Yes, we do, Herbert Jenkins interjected, standing before Deborah could continue. Madam President, I move to amend the agenda to include discussion of recent unauthorized architectural modifications, specifically the Cooper fence installation. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Deborah's face tightened almost imperceptibly. That matter falls under my emergency authority and is not open for discussion, she replied icily. According to Bylaw 17.3, emergency actions must be ratified by the full board within 7 days, Herbert countered, adjusting his bow tie. No such ratification vote has occurred. Before Deborah could respond, Linda Martinson stood. As board secretary, I must note that no official minutes exist documenting the emergency declaration. Without proper documentation, the action lacks procedural validity. Karen watched the parliamentary maneuvering with newfound appreciation. For years, she viewed HOA meetings as tedious formalities, but now she recognized them as the battlefield where community power was truly exercised. Deborah's knuckles whitened around her gavel. We are here to discuss the proposed amendment requiring presidential candidates to have prior board experience. Point of order, called David Cooper, rising from his seat. Before discussing new qualification requirements, shouldn't we address whether current leadership is following existing regulations? The audience erupted in a mix of applause and vocal agreement. Deborah pounded her gavel repeatedly, but the momentum had shifted. I have documentation, David continued when the room quieted, of 17 instances in the past month alone where HOA regulations were selectively enforced. He distributed a meticulously prepared packet to each board member, then handed copies to several key audience members. Karen recognized it as the dossier they compiled together over several late-night strategy sessions at David's dining room table, a partnership that had gradually evolved from strategic alliance to genuine friendship. Page 3 details the unauthorized fence installation, David explained. Page 4 shows the selective enforcement of noise regulations. Pages 5 through 7 document landscaping violations that were penalized for some residents but overlooked for others. As the evidence mounted, Deborah's composure began to crack. These accusations are baseless. I have served this community faithfully for 15 years. And we appreciate your service, Karen said, standing for the first time. She moved to the center of the room, projecting calm authority that surprised even herself. No one questions your dedication, Deborah, but perhaps after 15 years, it's time for fresh perspectives. Karen gestured toward the windows where the community green space was visible. The wildflower arrow had fully bloomed, but it no longer pointed accusingly at David's house. Instead, the surrounding area had been carefully planted as well, transforming the arrow into the centerpiece of a beautiful wildflower garden that spelled out community first. What was once an act of petty revenge has become something beautiful, Karen admitted openly. Just as our conflicts can transform into cooperation when we prioritize our shared interests over personal grudges. Her candid acknowledgement of her own initial motivations sent a ripple of murmurs through the audience. I moved to table the presidential qualification amendment, Herbert proposed, and instead form a governance review committee to evaluate our current regulatory framework. The motion passed overwhelmingly, with only Deborah and one loyal board member opposing. As the meeting shifted to constructive dialogue about community priorities, Deborah sat rigidly in her chair, watching 15 years of absolute authority dissolve before her eyes. After the meeting, as residents lingered to chat in unprecedented numbers, David approached Karen as she was collecting Mr. Fluffington's carrier. That was quite a transformation, he observed, nodding toward the wildflower garden visible through the windows. Both the garden and you. Karen smiled, a genuine expression devoid of the calculated charm she'd once wielded like a weapon. Revenge gardens make surprisingly good community spaces, she replied. Who knew? Election day in Maple Ridge Estates dawned with peculiar electricity in the air. The community center parking lot filled early, residents arriving in a steady stream to cast their votes for the HOA board, an event that had typically drawn less attention than the annual garden tour. Karen stood at the refreshment table she organized, pouring coffee for early voters while Mr. Fluffington, sporting a VOP Today bandana, charmed residents from his luxury pet carrier. Across the room, Deborah Wilson monitored the ballot box with the vigilance of an election official in a contested democracy. The 6 weeks since the emergency meeting had transformed Maple Ridge. The Governance Review Committee, which included both Karen and David, had already implemented several changes. A new transparency requirement for HOA decisions, a simplified violation reporting process, and most notably, the Community Improvement Initiative that had legitimized Karen's wildflower garden and encouraged similar resident-led beautification projects. David approached the refreshment table, accepting a cup of coffee from Karen. Nervous? He asked quietly. Oddly no, Karen replied truthfully. Whatever happens today, Maple Ridge is already changing for the better. Her campaign had evolved from a vehicle for revenge into a genuine platform for community reform. The Karen Blackwell Community First signs around the neighborhood no longer felt like personal branding, but rather a shared aspiration. By mid-afternoon, nearly 90% of residents had voted, a record turnout. As the counting began, Karen sat beside David in the back row, their unlikely friendship now a source of community amusement and inspiration. Herbert Jenkins approached the podium at precisely 5:00 p.m., adjusting his bow tie nervously. The results have been tallied and verified, he announced, for the position of HOA president. The room held its collective breath. We have a tie. Karen Blackwell and Deborah Wilson have each received exactly 127 votes. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. No one had anticipated this outcome, least of all Karen and Deborah, who exchanged shocked glances across the community center. Herbert cleared his throat. According to our bylaws, in the event of a tie, candidates may either agree to co-serve or participate in a runoff election in 30 days. Deborah immediately stood. I demand a runoff. This community needs decisive leadership, not compromised by committee. All eyes turned to Karen, who remained seated for a long moment, considering. The old Karen would have leaped at another chance to defeat Deborah outright, but the Karen who had emerged through weeks of community building saw a different opportunity. She rose slowly and addressed the room. I believe Maple Ridge has had enough division. The tied vote reflects a community ready for change but respectful of experience. She turned to face Deborah directly. I propose we co-serve, combining your institutional knowledge with fresh perspectives. Deborah's expression flickered between indignation and surprise. Co-serve? That's unprecedented. So is a tied election, Karen countered. Perhaps it's a sign we're meant to work together. The room erupted in applause and relieved laughter. Even Herbert Jenkins was smiling broadly. Deborah hesitated, then nodded curtly. A 1-year trial period, she stipulated, with clearly defined responsibilities. Agreed, Karen replied, extending her hand. After a moment's hesitation, Deborah shook it. As the meeting adjourned into an impromptu celebration, David joined Karen near the wildflower garden visible through the community center windows. Co-presidents, he mused. Quite the plot twist. Karen laughed. From mud traps